most welcome to this room. We are here to listen to a keynote from a man with a very dark past. This is a part of the newly started initiative EmPOWR Sustainable Stories Lab that has been going on here in Tallinn for 3 days. So welcome to the audience in the room and welcome to the audience worldwide. I'm happy to introduce you to Michel Wolfstirn from the Nordic Biomimicry Network from Oslo, and he will talk with us about egocentric versus ecocentric. The floor is yours, Michael. Michel.
Thank you. Do you remember a time where you fooled yourself very consciously? You built this whole story in your head to justify doing something that you're not entirely okay with it. But you need that story to convince yourself to do that thing anyway. I remember very clearly one such occasion. It was back in the early 2000s, sorry. I needed an internship to complete my master thesis. And in order to find it, I went to this job fair in Paris that was organized by my engineering school. So the hall was full of many big companies, and in the middle of it, I see this booth with fantastic pictures of nature. The jungle, the desert, the ocean. Oh, it was smelling like adventure. So I go talk to that company. And the guy I was talking to was working in Oslo, Norway. That sounded like adventure. So the only problem was that the company was an oil business, and I was interested in sustainability. But the pull of adventure, even though it wasn't about sustainability, quite the opposite, it created such a tension in me. So I created this story in my head to try and dissolve this tension. I was arguing that big oil knows that the end of the business is nigh. So they gotta invest in new ventures, in sustainable energy, right? So I thought it must be okay. I work with them, and in no time, I'll find myself in the R&D department of some really cool sustainable technology that they're gonna invest in. But that was so foolish of me. And the worst thing was, I knew it. But gosh, the smell of adventure. So I signed up for it, and the job that came with it after. And it took me over 8 years to get out of this. I made several attempts. I quit, came back, quit again. What finally got me out of it was a phone call with my sister, where she angrily asked me what I had done with my dreams, with my values. So I realized I had to change my own narrative. Stop fooling myself. The elements aligned shortly after in the form of a newsletter advertising for a fascinating discipline, a course in biomimicry. Biomimicry, sustainable innovation inspired by nature. It's about mimicking life. Think about it. Life creates conditions conducive to life. Life regenerates. It's sustainable. Imagine creating energy from the sun without using any toxic elements. Only regenerative ones, like the trees do when they photosynthesize. Or creating self-cleaning surfaces, like the lotus leaves. They manage to always stay clean thanks to their microstructure. And this would allow us to use a lot less water and detergents. So what if we could create ceramics at ambient temperature, like the abalone? It's a beautiful sea snail whose shell is actually the toughest ceramics on Earth. We can do all this. We can transfer nature's wisdom and strategies into our designs to solve our challenges. And the framework for this is biomimicry. Now it turns out that life has principles. Principles that make it regenerative. Life, and by that I mean the living world, is constantly adapting to changing conditions. It is locally attuned and responsive. It uses life-friendly chemistry. It's efficient in materials and energy. Life integrates development with growth. And of course, it evolves to survive. These are 6 major principles that life uses to be regenerative. And the funny thing is, pretty much all the rest of the living world is working under these principles. But we humans, for some reason, somehow managed to escape these. We've decoupled ourselves from this handbook on how to live on this planet. It hasn't served us so well, given the mess we're in with the climate crisis we have now. The era we live in is being called the Anthropocene. It's not official yet, though. It comes from anthropos, a Greek word which means human. And this name has been proposed because human activity is having such a defining impact on geology, ecosystems, and climate change. That says a lot about our disconnection from life's principles. And these principles are at the core of biomimicry. So when I came out of the oil industry, I studied biomimicry and started to work with it, facilitate workshops with it, and raise awareness about it. As a mechanical engineer, I was of course first attracted by the application of biomimicry to product design. And then I read a book called Teaming by Dr. Tamzin Woolley Barker. And that book showed how we can apply biomimicry to inspire better leadership and organizations. Did you know that some termites in Africa built dirt cathedrals that are several meters high? Thousands of insects collaborating. Not a single architect, not a single boss. Bee colonies, there can be 10,000s. And when they swarm to find a new location for their colony, they manage to find the best possible spot on a 70 square kilometer area, 90% of the time, without any managers. We got so much to learn from these superorganisms. So I started including biomimicry for organizations in my workshops. And reading more about the topic, I realized 2 things. One, transferring the practices from nature to human organizations requires some adaptation. You see, often we look at insect colonies, which are super efficient, but as far as we know, they don't have much of an ego. And we humans, we do have an ego, and it's sometimes in our own way. So when doing biomimicry for organizations, it's essential to integrate that component and tune nature's strategies to fit the ego into it. Secondly, as far as we know, nature has no intentionality. The natural selection process is blind. It happens without having a plan. Nature is not really creative. What we mistake for creativity in nature is the result of random genetic mutations, and they happen constantly. It's not a conscious process. But we humans, we have the ability to decide how we want to evolve as a society. We can decide where we want to go and for what reasons. We can design our future, and there lies the potential. To me, this is the key to our survival on this planet, the key to making this place thrivable for us and our fellow living beings. We can choose to reconnect with nature. We can choose to understand our place in the ecosystem rather than placing ourselves above it. We can choose sustainability, and it's going to take each and every one of us. French philosopher René Descartes said that we may render ourselves the masters and possessors of nature. With this statement, he was placing us humans above the rest of nature. And this mindset became more and more mainstream. It contributed accelerating the process of disconnection that had already started long before. The distance between us and the rest of nature just kept increasing with urbanization and industrialization. Now, placing ourselves there above the rest of nature is, to me, at the heart of the problem we face today. We've stopped understanding our belonging to our ecosystem. We've stopped doing our share to contribute back to the ecosystems that we so dearly depend on. Every breath we take, we might not be conscious of it, but it's connected to nature. It's enabled by all the organisms that photosynthesize. We have to thank every tree, every leaf of grass, for each breath we take. Now, Descartes is most famous for having said, "I think, therefore I am." And a friend of mine recently told me that Descartes had actually dropped the ball a little bit too early on this one. Because awareness is the key. I am aware, therefore I am. I am aware of my thoughts, therefore I can choose to do something with them. I can choose which ones I want to keep and which ones I want to discard. I can insert new narratives and reimagine myself. I can be mindful. And this is an amazing thing because it can free us to some extent. Now, we can't truly be free, of course. So many things are conditioning us. Our environment, our education, social setting, many more things, and not least our genes. All these contribute to our worldview, to the narratives we form in our heads. These narratives are not fixed. We can change our thoughts patterns. So how about intentionally evolving, designing narratives and cultures that support us, that make us thrive along with all other entities in our ecosystems? We can choose to live sustainably. The rest of the living world can show us how to. That's the point with biomimicry. That choice needs to be supported by new stories. We need to nudge ourselves out of the narratives that are both toxic for ourselves and for our environment. Mindfulness is one of the tools that can help us, and storytelling is another one that can help us design our new cultures. Note that I said cultures, plural, because like in the rest of nature, I believe diversity is the key to survival. Remember, one of life's principles is being locally attuned and responsive. There is a huge diversity of locals, and therefore we need a huge diversity of cultures and narratives supporting them. These cultures could, however, have a common denominator, like giving back to the environment, making sure that we contribute positively to the ecosystem no matter what we do, and placing us in the ecosystem rather than above it. When termites build dirt cathedrals, they don't have an architect or a boss dictating how it's going to look. What is good for the colony, social insects, it seems, have it built in their instincts. Getting humans to build amazing buildings takes more than instinct. We have to organize ourselves. Self-interest and ego can sometimes be in the way. But it's not always the case. We can achieve great things and put the ego aside, especially when we truly believe in something. Antoine de Saint-Exupéry said it best. If you want to build a ship, don't drum up the men to gather wood, divide the work, and give orders. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. Creating a vision, a purpose, is key. Inspiring visions can help elevate our level of consciousness, move away from our self-interest. They can make us care and act in the best interest of the entire ecosystem. Visions can help us reduce the perceived effort that it takes to achieve them. So what about creating visions of a sustainable world? We need to start by changing our inner narratives, the ones that shape our identities in order to make us get out of our own way. Change the narrative and it changes your world. Every day, I struggle to make the right choices, trying to act according to my care about the environment. It's difficult. Every choice is taking a lot of energy, and there's only so many choices one can do in the course of a day. One way around this is creating habits. Once something has become a habit, it doesn't take any energy any longer, and then you can move on to making new choices for other things. Narratives are another way to reduce the energy it costs us to make a choice, to create a new habit. They can help make the choice evident and nudge us. And moving beyond the individual, there are the narratives about who we are as communities, as societies, as humans. These narratives need to be changed drastically. The current paradigm revolves around science, around control. We believe that technology will solve everything. We believe we can control everything and fix it. If we had only a little bit more data or more powerful algorithms, a little bit more time, we think we're so close to fixing it all. But we're a funny bunch, really, because we keep using technology to also solve problems that have their root cause in behavior and culture. Because we're too lazy to do the work on ourselves, on our way of behaving. We create band-aids with technology. Communication problems? Let's create an app, or many. Surely that will help us better express ourselves or empathize. The big problem now is climate change. Imagine, now we're already talking about Plan B. Colonizing Mars, terraforming it. We have lots of technology and this incredible hubris. Some are thinking we're going to send a fraction of the population to Mars, into space, and start to rebuild the complexity of the ecosystem we depend on here, from scratch, in a really hostile environment. So I'm thinking, wait a second here. Historically, we've seen that when we think we know everything, that we got it under control, we see unwanted consequences emerge. And not only that, we already have a planet that has a lot less hostile environment, with an ecosystem that supports us. Why does it seem more realistic to some of us to go ahead and colonize Mars instead of fixing the things that we need to fix here to readapt to our environment, to contribute to our ecosystems and support them? Because the state of the Earth now is still way better than Mars will ever be in the next 3 centuries. Have we given up on ourselves? Do we think we've already fucked it up so badly here that we might as well start from scratch somewhere else? Or is it just the smell of adventure? Starting from a clean slate and controlling everything? Almost like being gods? We have this urge to control things, it seems, control nature as well. But the thing is, if we remove ourselves from nature, it clearly doesn't need us to create an amazing, sustainable ecosystem. Control in nature is not really that important. In other natural societies, it seems to be the opposite of the norm. Think of a forest, for instance. Thousands of species coexisting, working together, creating a regenerative ecosystem. No leader, no control. Each species respects life's principles, and some form of harmony emerges. Take the example of starlings. You've all seen those birds balloting in the skies. Thousands of them dancing as one cloud, as if they were one entity. Not one of them crashing into each other. None of them leading, none of them keeping the control over the whole flock. The only thing that each bird is keeping control of is about 7 of its neighbors. Yet beauty and order emerges. So we may think it's impossible to change 8 billion people, but it all starts locally, at the individual level, within tiny groups. And there's really no need to control the whole when things are done well at a small scale, like with the starlings. So what if the only thing we needed to do is to control ourselves? I'll take a metaphor that I read in a book recently by Emmanuel Delannoy. The surfer is not trying to control the wave. She controls her technique to ride the wave the best way possible. Now, nature, climate change, they are the wave. So what we should try and control is ourselves, how we behave on this planet so we can integrate the best way possible with our ecosystem. We need to move from being egocentric to being ecocentric. And one of the most supportive things we can do to achieve this is to tell new stories, build new narratives about how we can behave in a harmonious way with the rest of the living beings on this planet. We need a vision, and we need to visualize it in order to be able to get there. And I suspect that empathy, building empathy, is key here to becoming ecocentric. Because empathy allows us to understand someone else's or something else's perspective. Empathy can reconnect us to our ecosystem. It can help us elevate the level of consciousness. So we need to tell better stories that help us empathize, that help us build a positive vision of the future and nudge us out of our addiction to unsustainable behaviors. We need stories that help improve our inner narratives, that help us ride the wave, step out of our fear to change and into curiosity, wonder, connection, and care. I was telling myself stories when I chose to work in the oil industry. The pictures of nature, the vibe of adventure, they were resonating with the stories I was telling myself about myself. I've always wanted to be an adventurer, to have an exciting life, travel, experience the wilderness. So I also have felt a certain closeness to nature. But what happened at that job fair was a cognitive dissonance. So I was split between my care for the environment and my longing for adventure. And I resolved it by telling myself a story that I didn't even entirely believe in myself. But it helped ease the dissonance. Emmanuel Delannoy had this beautiful expression. He calls the era where we reconnect with nature, where we live in symbiosis with nature, the Symbiocene. It's not an era where we're back to being cavemen. Quite the opposite. It's an era where we understand our place within the ecosystem, where we thrive with the rest of nature. And science and technology might as well help us there. So, can we tell stories that support our journey from the Anthropocene to the Symbiocene? To do this, I believe we need 3 things. Stories that support our inner narratives, stories that elevate the consciousness of society and help us empathize and consciously evolve new cultures, stories that help us visualize a better future, the Symbiocene. I don't know what these stories will look like, but the journey from the Anthropocene to the Symbiocene seems like an amazing adventure. Now, this room here is full of storytellers. So why don't you use your power and help us out here? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michel. I have a chair for you here.
Thank you.
Voila. Please have a seat. And I'm also happy to invite Valeria Richter, Nordic Factory, Copenhagen, and myself, Helene Granqvist from Nordic Factory, Sweden. The background to this, that you're here, is that we have run a lab here in Tallinn, EmPOWR Sustainable Storage Lab, funded by Valeria and I. And maybe we should give a little background, Valeria, to why did we start this process. And I will also say we have made some notes from our 3 days lab. We have them here, where we will reflect on them together with you, Michel. So that is the concept you're going to listen to. But background to New Nordic Narrative.
Well, you can say we're kind of not confusing things, but the EmPOWR Sustainable Stories Lab came out of a process that is ongoing that Helen and I started in Nordic Factory called New Nordic Narratives, which has not really kicked off yet. It's kind of a secret project yet, you can say. But because we've been running a workshop here in Tallinn for 12 years called Power, it was just like at our fingertips to change it to EmPOWR, because there's like one issue that we cannot avoid anymore, and we work with script development and pitch coaching, and that is that we need to change the way we work in the film and TV industry to make it more sustainable all the way around, from scriptwriters and directors and producers to the way we finance things. And because we come from, let's say, the creative bottom up, you know, people that write scripts, that come up with ideas, create worlds, it was natural for us to focus on that and say, where can we make a change? And that's from the area that we're working in. And then maybe we can meet, you know, there are lots of funds and financiers who are creating CO2 quota applications and programs and other things, but that's sort of a top-down thing. So we thought, if we also start, then maybe, you know, somewhere in the middle, things might happen and change between us.
Yeah, but then of course we had this conflict, because you should not mess with art, because art must be free.
Yes.
So we can't get into an artist and say, hey, you are going to change society now to help with this. So how did we deal with that?
Well, I'm a scriptwriter myself now, and I met with limitations all the time already. If you want to co-produce, there are certain limitations, certain decisions and choices you have to make. If you want to use certain locations, then suddenly other limitations come. To use a very old reference, the Danish dogma films used limitations as a creative work tool. So what we experience in the 3 days now is that getting feedback and dialogue on your projects from the angles of diversity and sustainability really opened up a lot of doors. And instead of creating a sense of limitation, it created a sense of opportunity. So we are so happy that actually, you know, this fear we can immediately put down.
Yeah, I hope so. We have some of the participants in the audience here in Tallinn. So if there are any of you objections, if something we say it doesn't resonate with what you felt during these 3 days, but our impression was really that we had consult experts coming in to our lab, story lab, with projects in TV series and one feature film in very early stage of development. They read the project and they came with feedback related to their subjects. That was diversity, that was sustainability, and PR. And why PR? Yeah, PR in this case was that I think we made some kind of research. We have talked hours and hours together. How can we implement these thoughts in what we are already doing? And I think for us, it was so obvious that both diversity and sustainability right now is not only demands that we all need to tackle, especially when we shoot. We already have green shooting programs that are coming to be demands when we will get money from public funds, etc. We asked ourselves the question, can we use this as assets, but also as unique selling points? Can it be used to actually encourage the outreach process and the audience engagement process. And Valeria, you wrote a book about audience engagement. So.
That's true. But I don't think we should talk about that now. No. I want to bridge over to Michel, because you also watch film and TV and streaming, and of course aware as well that there's a bit of the dark side there.
Yeah.
So when you ask us to create new narratives, are you personally thinking that you would like to watch different types of stories? Or do you think that you would even care in your couch on a Friday night when you're tired and drinking red wine, whether something is produced in a green way or not? It might not make any difference, but so I'm more thinking if it's like different types of stories.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny because it's not before we started talking that I started realizing also the sustainability behind like the creation of the film, like from a carbon point of view. So I was more focused on the narratives because I'm also teaching a little bit to design students, and it's quite funny because if you ask them, where do you think the future is going? What is it going to look like? They all have those dark visions in their heads, you know. And when you reverse the exercise and ask them first, what would you like the future to look like? And there you get visions of slow living, being close to nature. There's no mention of technology whatsoever, you know. And I realized, yeah, but that's the thing we're lacking, actually. We're lacking this, this dream of a utopia. We need to visualize those things. I mean, just the idea of going to the moon, you know, that emerged way back in some poems. I think that was the first thing, and then Jules Verne, and so on. And this created a narrative, and then we thought, okay, let's go there. And it's amazing. So could we do the same thing, but with like a better future for us?
I mean, actually, what you could call in film history, the world's first sci-fi movie, a little black and white trick film, was about going to the moon. So
that's true, yeah.
Yes, so we had documentaries, people leaving factories, and we had going to the moon. That was the beginning of film history. So the vision has been there from the beginning. Now the reality is catching up. Yeah, but I think in our lab, isn't it right, Helen, that what that sense that especially the producers also came up with, or some of them, is that sense of constantly living in damage control.
Yeah, that it's more about damage control than actually create something that is sustainability. That was something we heard. Is that something what would you reflect on that, Michel?
Damage control.
Instead of creating sustainability, that we all know that there are things that are not right, and then you create a lot of energy to, so to say, try to control the damage.
So do less bad, but still keep doing bad.
Exactly.
Yeah, because isn't that what oil industry and everyone else actually is still doing after COP26?
Yeah, I guess we're all doing it. I mean, me also on a daily basis.
Yeah,
I mean, I flew here.
Listening to you, we hear some kind of need of reboot the system, right?
Yeah, I think we need to dream bigger. I think that probably
should be the right industry to do it in, shouldn't it? What do you say, audience?
Yeah, I mean, I think the damage control, from our point of view, also comes that it becomes this sort of short-term culture that we're in, and it's an attitude that is not sustainable. And I think a lot of times, when you think about working with diversity and sustainability, which is also too long to explain, but they're very intimately connected, the two. It's like, oh, but it takes too much time, it takes too many resources. And I think what also was, what came out of the lab was that you can just do little things.
Yeah, and I think what also came out that it's in the pre-production. In our arena, it's in story development, and in pre-production we have the biggest field where we need the change, because we are minimizing the pre-production time more and more, and that has consequences. So it was very obvious. But I have a quote here that's old habits is also story. That we continue to show things on film that is not reflected, that are representing all habits that is unsustainable. And I'm quite sure, and I have this idea, and you might protest, Michel, if you don't agree, because I have this idea that I think in this room and online, all people that are listening to this, if we would ask, what are the biggest environmental problems, we will probably could cover them all together. It's not that we not know about it. And then if we say, okay, are the solutions to this problem? We will probably cover the solutions as well. So that is not the problem. You know, we have a quite big knowledge of what the problem is and what the solution. And when you said the word addiction, and you talk about the oil, so are we a big freaking alcoholic family?
But I think it's because a lot of people think it's a burden. You know, they don't see that it's something like, oh, we have to deal with this, instead of what also I think we experience now is that it can be an asset. That it's like you're losing out on something you're not even aware that you're losing out on.
No, but
and it's not just to change the stories we're telling, because the focus is very much on how we produce them. And again, there's total artistic freedom, but there could be told more stories which are about the relationship between people and nature, or that we become aware of the norms that we use when we tell our stories. And you have a lot to say about norms.
No, but the funny thing with norms, because when you are in the middle of the norm, you don't see it. When you are the norm, it's invisible. I think that is so intriguing, because I always have this, that it's nice to experience more of yourself. But imagining that you are in a norm that is not sustainable, but it's invisible to you because somehow you have become the norm. That means that we are depending on those that are outside the norm to see the norms. And that is also why diversity and inclusion is really connected to sustainability, because these norms of ours that we all live, and we don't do it to be bad persons, we do it because we are used to do it and it feels normal to do it. But this feeling of normality actually works against us. So we really need to, you know, if you try to you put your hands like this and then you try to do the other way, it feels really uncomfortable. But that is what norm changing is. The first time you do it, it feels uncomfortable, but then you get used to it. And I think these small things is really what we need to find. And I was so happy when you said that. You really need to find these small things and these groups of sevens. You didn't say it about humans, you said it about birds, but it sounds really nice, I think.
Yeah, I think it starts at the local level, and we don't have to, because it sounds so daunting to change everything at once, and also back to what you were saying earlier, it seems like we need to sacrifice a lot to get there. So I think we first need to make the vision of getting there to what I call or Emmanuel Delannoy calls the Symbiocene. We need to make that so attractive that it doesn't really feel like a burden to make concessions compared to your current way of living. But also I think we have to think about the values that we convey in what we present, you know, because you mentioned earlier this whole thing about addiction, and we're becoming less and less patient, you know. And I see it myself when I watch a series. I'm just irritating when it ends with a cliffhanger, and I have to wait a full year to see the next, you know. But we have to cultivate those values that we need, because if we keep going in the consumerism, then of course it's going to be harder and harder to get out of that logic. So I don't know how this can be conveyed, and how the industry can be changed.
One of the quotes from our, because we were looking at too much of everything all the time, was one thing that was said by one of our participants, and that has become an habit. That consumism, that is also consumism, and consumism as a habit is something that is very easy to attach to a story today. But then if we go back to our lab and look at Anne and Fredrik and Yannick, who is in the room, but it was inspiration, wasn't it? Nodding. So I nod because I can see it now, but it too really get in through this angle, because most of us, you listening, you are developing stories. And you know how it feels when you are in the room and you get the inspiration. And especially when you share it in between creators. And I think we really had this happening. And it, of course, made us happy, because we have been engineers and tried to create this lab, and we didn't know before if it's going to work or not. But I think we experienced together that if you go into this room and listen to those people that knows more than you about these things and let these thoughts into the creative process, it will not be something that make the arts less free. It will be something that, like when you do research, if you do a movie about another time, you will do research, and it had the same effect, that you get inspiration and look at things from other angles.
Can that expand your world?
Yeah, you expand your world, you get new tools, and I think that was, yeah, there were some moments, I think, yeah, then we had, yeah, but a lot is so much sloppy writing that we just write as we always been writing, in not thinking of what this writing actually means. And there was one word that was said the first day from very many of our participants, and that was that the importance of why we do things. And I think you said something the same. You asked yourself.
I was actually going to mention that, because I think we have to be a little bit smarter. I understand the need for freedom of creation, but I'm an engineer, and we have also this tendency in engineering and design to, why do you do things? Oh, because we can do it. And maybe it's a little bit this kind of God complex that we have, we can do it, so let's do it. Instead of thinking about why are we going to do this? People talk about AI and, robots getting smarter, and I'm like, okay, this is putting my existence into question. What is our role as humans on this planet, and how's all that? And people just keep working on that and developing this without asking questions. But we've developed all those tools, philosophy, psychology, and how about being smarter and using those and not just out of what we think or we know is not
also
good for
because
us.
Nobody creates in a vacuum.
Yeah.
An engineer, he makes a bridge. Hopefully nobody gets killed, it falls.
But yesterday, when I asked you yesterday evening, but you're an engineer, aren't you trained to solve problems? That's what you do, you engineers. And then you answered, yeah, but...
Yeah, exactly.
But then we have our fascination for technology and things we're good at, so we forget about, Yeah,
but again, I think it's because with our diversity consultant, we also talked about how my personal freedom to do what I want, and of course I have freedom of speech and all these things, but also to keep the collective well-being in mind, to find a balance between the two, that, I can do what I want and to hell with everyone else. Is that a sort of cool rock and roll attitude, or is it just outdated now, maybe?
Yeah. Well, how about, do you remember how it was said, the common well-being?
The personal artistic freedom.
Yeah, the common well-being of the collective goes before the personal artistic freedom. That was something that was mentioned.
It's a statement, right?
It's quite interesting, because we have been protecting this personal artistic freedom. But if we look at the common, and the common in a very big sense then, and of course, we also had this dimension that we played with. We played with goals, and I remember that you were a bit surprised when we asked about the planet goals with a project, because you can have your personal goal, you can have your project goal, you can have your PR goal, audience goal, but if you have a planet goal, and add that thought to what you're doing, what do you say about that?
So when you're saying the planet goal, do you think about us as humans, or are you thinking including the environment and all that?
I think we let our participants be totally confused and do what they wanted, but it was a way to train us to think in new ways. And it's also because when we do a film or TV project, because that's what we do in our industry, that's where this our kind of engineering. We create stories for an audience. And when we do that, we always have goals with that, of course. But if we add a planet goal, that we have a goal that is related in a bigger way, I want this to lead to something.
Well, is there any kind of dimension in what we're doing with this project that could help sustain the planet?
Yeah, that could influence people.
Or our life on the planet? Because I think ultimately I'm very tired of dystopias myself. I think they're the easy way out to make a dystopia. I don't want to promote utopias. I think the area between them is where all the interesting stuff is happening.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's...
Yeah, but wasn't that, I look at our participants again, if we look at things we agreed on, I think one thing that we very much agreed on was to dare to address a problem and to let it be difficult and to share this moment of things being difficult, even if we don't know exactly now how to solve it.
Or the answer.
By allowing this presence of this problem also, in a way, reminded us of storytelling in usual, because we know that we need to get into uncomfortable things to tell stories. You can never be comfortable and doing stories. We know that. If you're comfortable, you will not do it. The good stories come out of that things are uncomfortable and not being afraid of that. Then you can do it more or less, of course. But that somehow, as a group, to let these things be there and not have this... We also talked about being conscious, confused together. To be together was also, I think, an important thing in our room. Don't be alone with these feelings and these problems. Try to, maybe it's groups of 7, you talk, but try to be in this together with other people, and don't put on, we saw on our producers that they immediately, as producers, they took on the burden and they got so tired, okay, I am a producer, I have to add another thing to my already heavy burden. But it was very obvious, no, that is not how it should be done. It should be something we carry together. It should not be on the shoulders of the producer. This needs to be something that everyone add to, and I think you said that as well. And it's not. And we had also our Estonian participants. Maybe you would like to share this. That you don't need to be in a privileged production circumstances. Everyone can do something.
But it is very much, you know, that we're suffering under, let's say, a Western dominant approach,
yeah,
a Western dominant norm, and so you can say it lies more on us to also go in and take other point of views, yeah, and, you know, be maybe more role models instead of, again, just dumping our problems on people with less resources, yeah, yeah, which we've done for centuries.
Yeah, yeah.
So, but I agree, yes, it's...
yeah.
I think I like what you said about, you know, you're fed up with dystopias, but you don't want to just promote utopias, and I agree with that. I think we need a diversity. It's super important because it allows exploring a lot of options, and you never know what comes out of, you know, one idea. It's like when you're brainstorming, a stupid idea actually needs to be put out there because somebody might bounce on it, and it may go to somewhere really clever. And I think in the same fashion, we need a diversity of stories, but we need to pay attention maybe to what becomes the dominant narratives. Because right now what I'm observing is the stuff that is thrown at me is mostly dystopias. And can we have mostly more positive stuff coming out there? But I'm still keen on having a diversity of stories. You know, I think it's super important.
Yeah, and I don't think our community would accept anything else. But I think we have could open for some questions. I think there is a microphone somewhere. Is there anyone who would like to reflect or have any thoughts or say something? We have a man in the square shirt there.
Good day. My name is Tanel. I'm going to reflect on the idea of dystopia and utopia because this talk reminded me a newspaper article that I read a while ago, and that was exactly on that topic, that the sci-fi writers and the films that we're seeing, majority of them are dystopian. And there's a real lack of utopian narratives that will bring audiences to cinemas and that would also be engaging. And another on that note, how to create that sort of fondness towards utopia, because I remember a theater play from years ago that was staged, but it wasn't successful, and it was a completely utopian idea with a happy ending sci-fi theme on a theater play stage, and people were not into it, as if our human mind wants to see rather destruction than something positive. So the question is, in a way, that what needs to be changed in our mind to see some value in a utopian way, that we will start telling sci-fi stories from the future point of view, that we have a happy ending.
But, I mean, if I can answer first, I would say the utopia is not interesting either. And I think a lot of the dystopias we see are based on an idea of an utopia that then turns out to be destructive. You see, like that the world has gone to shit, climate change, blah, 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 and the future generation thinks they're going to do it better this way. That's often the starting point for a lot of the sci-fi stories. And then, of course, it turns out all the problems that are with this new way that supposedly was better. So again, I think we need to use our imagination more. You know, we just need to challenge ourselves. What are these spaces in between? What are the type of stories? And it doesn't have to be total sci-fi. You know, I think it's incredible, and I don't know if it was in your talk as well, but what really spoke to me was how we make all these stories about going into space and into Mars, and we might genetically alter ourselves to survive living out in space. And I did a lot of research on genetic editing. That's still some years into the future. So why do we not focus more on how we can survive on this planet before everything is destroyed? You know, there must be stories and drama and conflict there as well.
I don't have this idea from storytelling, but I've been, and before I became an activist for gender equality, I was an environmental activist, and the reason I decided to engage in gender equality was because I read research in, I think, in the end of the 90s, that the most efficient way to reach sustainability is to invest in women. But that was not my main thing. But when I was engaged in environmental thing, I had this imagination that we are now living in an idea that things are so big. We have one solution, one big habit, and if that should be changed, it should be changed by another big habit. But that is not the fact, I think. I think is this, you have to do this, I don't know, rethink in your mind that big problems can only be met by very local and small changes. And it is this termite story you have. It is us together. It's not, you are not going to do the big invention that save us all. It doesn't help that Bruce Willis suffer himself in Armageddon. That's not the way we can look at solutions, I think. I think solutions, it's small things. It's one person do something that inspires you, that touches you, that then meet you, and then and that is also because we are not trained to see the value in that, because we are trained to see, it's just a big hero. But these small things, I think it's just this total hero idea is
there is a shift towards more, let's say, community stories or group stories, but now the world has also a crisis of storytelling in regard to, you know, cinema owners and you know, speculation. Yeah. When money or the fear of losing money comes into play, there's always that sense of going back to what we know sells. Yeah. But do you really know that, or you know? So it's like you say, we need to be able to stay in this confusion and fear and risk and keep taking risks.
But Anna, you and I work a lot as pitch coaches, so we meet a lot of projects, and I think most of the projects we meet right now, you know, we don't want one main character. We want a multi-character story. We want complex stories. We also meet, I have coached many films where the climate change is a character, or there is something else that is not a human, that is a character. So I also think, doesn't we see these kind of stories that we're actually asking for are already out there, and it's somehow a symbol? And because that was another thing that, I don't know if we already talked about, but this about intuition and gut feeling. Would you like to?
But before you go there, can I just add something? Yeah. Because the complexity is really the key there, I think. We have this tendency to just go for shortcuts constantly, right? And we make stories very simple and easy to grasp. And I think the size of the problems we face today, you know, the world is just becoming more and more complex. And if you keep refusing that this is the case, and if we keep refusing to handle complexity and become comfortable with the complexity, then we're shooting ourselves in the foot. So I do think that we have to play on that complexity also in the storytelling, and learn to get comfortable with navigating that space.
And I'm quite sure that artists find that much more interesting and challenging, right? Don't you think? Isn't it so?
Sure, and I mean, there's room for everything. It's not like that suddenly everyone has to tell the same type of stories. That's not what this is about.
No, but I think to get into this kind of field, I forgot about it, but maybe there are other questions.
We have a couple of minutes.
Thanks. I also have a comment on this issue of like freedom of storytelling and like restricting freedom now through like the problem of sustainability. And I think it's really important also that we have a slightly more nuanced understanding of this sort of freedom, because I think there's so many people in our ecosystem that I think never actually had that freedom to tell the stories they wanted to.
Exactly.
I think when we speak of us, and I think that's us in the global north and Western sort of production companies, I think it's really important to, you know, be very conscious of that fact that, you know, now that we complain that, oh, suddenly we have to feel restricted in terms of the stories we can tell, I think, you know, that's also a very, very privileged way to look at it, because there's so many people that never actually, you know, got to make that choice of like, oh, this is a story I can't tell, because they were kind of forced into, you know, only certain stories. That's, I mean, you know, Helene, we talk about this so much, like the connection between sustainability and liberation, or inclusion, whatever you want to call it. And I think that goes hand in hand. That's so important to, you know, to have on the radar.
Yeah, so what you say, who's included in this we, and who do we mean when we talk
exactly,
about
when we
us?
speak of we,
Yeah.
I mean, it's just the same thing, like when we say like humans have caused climate change, that's not correct, because it's white humans or humans in the global north that have caused climate change. And it's those mostly in the global south that suffer from it. You know, so when we say these things like the we, you know, we have to be very, very conscious of who that we is.
Yeah, you're totally right. It's really, again, questioning and getting more aware of our own position that we speak from and what is included and not.
But maybe that I look at old habits is also story, but it's story, as we talked about norms, that it's invisible. We forget about it just because it feels normal. But what you actually mean is that we should question what is it that feels normal, and who is paying for my normal could also be a question. And am I willing to look myself in the mirror if I let that be a conscious thought? Because that is, of course, we can all make our choices.
Yeah, and if I keep repeating...
I don't want to change. I'm perfectly comfortable. I deal with my eventual guilt or whatever it is, but or not.
If we keep repeating the same narratives, and I think that was a nice point that came out regarding diversity, to maybe just round off with that and see what the other twos want to round off. But it's not just about how you cast your film or your TV show. It's also about, do you address questions related to this in the story, or is there attitudes in your characters where you leave them uncommented where they should be commented within your narrative, so as for them not to just stand there as an accepted norm. And I think that opened up a lot for people to see how you can work with the idea of diversity.
But then I must say this about intuition, because you know, our intuition, our gut feeling is among the strongest tool we have, and we have to trust it, but we also have to trust that it's worth to have a look at it with eyes. That means responsibility, and that is also interesting, because that inspires us, right? We got inspired. We don't have to blame ourselves if we go wrong. That was also one thing we talked about. I think it's necessary to go wrong, but to learn to say, I'm sorry, when you realize I went wrong, but not going anywhere because of the fear of take the wrong step. that is not excusable, I think,
No.
anymore. We need to dare to step wrong. And then if I hurt someone, I'm so sorry I hurted you. It wasn't my meaning.
I will do better next time.
I want to do better next
Yeah.
time. And that was also something we talked about in this room. More questions, audience.
We're kind of over time now.
Are we over time? No one told us. Or someone told us. Okay, no one. You're nodding. So,
Can I just add one
Yeah.
last comment? Because I'm just wondering what's preventing us from, using the same plot that you have for the Total Recall and placing it in the Utopia. Is there anything that prevents us from creating parallels, with plots that are existing, but just placing them in a universe that is a lot more positive? That alone would just create something.
It's
different.
perfect, Michel, because then we can end with a question, because that's what we said, that this lab, the most important thing was not to create solutions, it was to end with questions. And I think having the opportunity and having the word, we also would like to thank the support from Industry Tallinn, of course, from the 4 embassies in Tallinn, Sweden, Norway, Finland, and Denmark, the Danish Culture Fund, and the
Cultural Institute.
Cultural Institute, and the Nordic
Council
of
Office.
Ministers, I think.
Council of Ministers
Council of
Office in
Ministers.
Estonia.
Yeah, that was all. Yeah, we are very happy for.
And WIFTI, of course.
And WIFTI, of course. Yeah, we are very happy that we had the possibility to do this, and thank you all for coming here and listening to us, and thank you all, everyone out there in cyber. Hope to continue this soon. Bye.